You're all probably aware from the news that a 12-year-old girl was put in isolation and then sent home from school for wearing a Union flag dress to a culture day. This then prompted the school to issue an apology, and surprisingly, the right wing have been all over this. Now, 99% of the time when you hear a story about this, it's usually completely twisted. Read beyond the headline and it's far different to the narrative being spun. But in this regard, a girl was sent home for wearing a Union flag dress on a day about celebrating culture. Now, it is my view that the school was completely wrong. No child should be isolated and no child should be made to feel bad for wearing a British flag at a literal culture event. Having said that, it's important for all context to be included in the story. And whilst it's my view that none of it excuses the actions of the school, it doesn't mean that there isn't a grift at play here. In fact, the grift is obvious. The girl has now been invited to speak at a Tommy Robinson protest.
Yay!
What are you happy about, babe?
Tommy Robinson gonna listen to my speech and I'm gonna perform it to thousands of people.
Millions.
Billions of people.
Not only that, but the dad is clearly a knuckle-dragging reactionary appearing on multiple podcasts, and he's set up a GoFundMe. I mean, what exactly the funds are needed for is a mystery. I also came across this comment on YouTube. There is definitely more to this story than what is being explained here. I'm a teacher, and we had the same week and there were speeches and costumes like hers. No one in their right mind would just stop a girl speaking about Britain in Britain unless there was something else that this family of hers is omitting. So to only focus on her not being able to give the speech. Got a lot of people commenting about how wrong it is without anyone in the report really saying why it happened. There must be more to it, and it sounds like there is something missing and the school are being diplomatic about it. It's just not common sense to accept the story as it is. Now, of course, this is just a comment with no source, but I have seen a couple of people say the same thing. It is also worth pointing out that it seems like this is a case of an overzealous teacher rather than being a case of the school banning the celebration of British culture. We encourage students to consider wearing attire that reflects their nationality or family heritage. This cannot include sports kits such as football kits. Please ensure that any outfit worn is appropriate for a school setting and holds cultural significance. If your child is unsure about what to wear or has any questions, they are welcome to speak with their form tutor for guidance. If your child chooses to wear cultural dress, the document below must be completed by Tuesday the 8th of July. So it wasn't a policy, it was just seems like a decision made by the teacher. Now, she also made a speech at the school, and this is what she said. Today, I want to talk about my culture, British culture, and why it's important to me. In Britain, we have lots of traditions, including drinking tea, our love for talking about the weather, and we have the royal family. We have amazing history, like kings and queens, castles, and writers like Shakespeare. It's also modern, diverse, and always changing, with music, fashion, and food from all around the world blending into daily life. And let's not forget fish and chips. It's also the way we speak, our humour, our values of fairness and politeness, and a mix of old traditions and new ideas. But sometimes at school, we only hear about other cultures, which is great because learning about different countries is interesting and important, but it can feel like being British doesn't count as a culture just because it's the majority. I think culture should be for everyone, not just for people from other countries or backgrounds. Being British is still a culture and it matters too. It's part of who I am. So let's celebrate all cultures, whether they come from far away or right here at home. Thank you. Now, I think that's a pretty reasonable speech if you ask me. I mean, maybe the point about where she says they only hear about other cultures and it doesn't feel like being British counts as a culture is something that seems a bit like the dad has put in there, right? But again, it's no reason to send anyone home. Now, I feel sorry, really sorry for the girl. She's being used as political fodder by the dad and now Tommy Robinson and the rest of the far right. The decision to send the girl home was an appalling one. And it has given a huge amount of ammunition to the far right. I don't think there was anything wrong with the speech, really. I mean, maybe that one sentence. But regardless, right, it's a culture event. And if someone wants to wear the British flag, what's the problem with that? Now, of course, the far right, the right-wing media, right-wing politicians are going to use this and run with it and say, once again, We are institutionally anti-British. The schools are teaching woke ideology and to hate British people and white people. That's what they're going to say. Of course, that is a load of bollocks because one, this obviously doesn't happen very often. And two, as we've just gone through, it wasn't policy for the school to send anyone home for wearing a British flag. It sounds like it was just an overzealous teacher, right? Now, of course, the school's come out and apologized as well, but that won't stop the far right. But I think it does throw us a lot of questions. I did really want to get Noffel in for this because it would be really interesting. Because I think generally there needs to be a conversation about, like, I'm just going to lay it straight, right? I am not someone who considers myself as a progressive patriot or progressive patriotism, right? And the last sort of time that happened was during the Labour Party leadership contest where Rebecca Long-Bailey pitched the progressive patriotism. It didn't go down very well. I mean, her whole leadership didn't go down very well, but people kind of took the piss out of her. It was quite funny. But I do think in 2025, given the 21st century politics and where we're at, maybe it should be taken seriously. Now, again, I don't think that this is what everyone should be doing. But if someone wants to make that case, I'm not opposed to it. But before we do that, I think we've got Noffel back in. Noffel, I just want to get your assessment of the story. And do you agree with what I've been saying as well?
Yeah, I think this is a complete mischaracterization by the right-wing media in general to fuel culture wars, just as they usually do. The way I've seen this is exactly how you've described, which is one overzealous teacher and the ability to actually put forward what British culture looks like. And I do think that's partly because British culture had been lost to the industrial ages. People used to not reap nationalism as we understand by the state, but they would usually adopt their local community or village's customs. A lot of that has been lost in industrialized cities, and a lot of that has been lost in general. And these customs and traditions are only really carried out in small parts of Britain that have these strong ties and have decided not to give them up. And so I think it's sort of unfair to paint the inclusion and diversity that we have in Britain since the 40s, 50s, all the way to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where a lot of these different different people from ex-colonies came in and integrated within British culture and made their own culture. But more importantly, I think it's quite absurd to keep going on about this culture war. I mean, the right says that they hate identity politics, yet they parrot identity politics all the time. The likelihood is that this was just a one-off occasion where a teacher has got it wrong, stupidly so, and a child is now also, by their parents, being made to be this political ploy. Now, if you ask me, I think the parents would have had these attitudes regardless of no matter what happened. Because when I saw the letter from the school, it said that no flags were allowed. Now, is it still unfair to send a child home? Of course it is. No child should be subject to politics like that. But even within the speech and the contradicting stories that the parents have given and the comments they've made, and now this Tommy Robinson speech, it seems like they already had these underlying tensions, and now the billionaire-backed media is exploiting them to fuel this anti-British agenda, which doesn't really exist. And so I think it's completely representative of the state of what this country's turned into, which is the right claiming that the left have gone all crazy and loony on identity politics, yet only talking about identity politics.
Do you think there is a genuine conversation we can have about the relationship with this kind of thing in the left? I mean, do parts of the left embrace progressive patriotism? Obviously, I mentioned how Rebecca Long-Bailey kind of used that as a part of a strategy, didn't really go anywhere. But no, it's not my politics. I'm a Marxist. I look at things through the lens of the material. Culture genuinely takes a back seat for me, but it is clearly important to other people. And I'm not saying that every leftist needs to become a flag shagger, but if there are people within the movement who feel that they want to go in that direction, shouldn't we let them rather than sort of criticize them? I mean, what do you think about that?
I think, listen, Britain has a great history, it has a great culture, and it genuinely has a great story behind it in terms of its industry, in terms of its literature, in terms of its theatre, in terms of its music, in terms of its philosophy. These are all things that are so great about the UK, and these are cultural things that should be celebrated. Do I think we need patriotism necessarily to do that? Not really. I mean, if you want to promote these things, maybe take a look at funding the arts again, maybe take a look at setting up more school trips for children, maybe take a look at giving underprivileged children the ability that wealthy children do to experience these cultural events and these exhibits. The truth is, like I said before, industrialization has meant that a lot of people moved out of their villages, communities, and went straight into cities, and they lost that culture. I don't think the left needs to adopt patriotism because I'm very skeptical of patriotism. I don't think it's a bad thing at all to love your country necessarily. What I do think is bad is the way elites manipulate that sort of patriotism and say, you're patriotic, go off to Iraq to fight for me. You're patriotic, make sure you attack the other worker at home because they're not Anglo-Saxon. And that's really my issue. I think the left can completely do this. I think there's so many different policies and pathways that we can take that have already been gutted out because of just the shift to capitalism. And there's nothing wrong with British culture inherently. Hey, I just think we need to return to that in a way which gives people the opportunity to understand their history. And we have a great history.
I mean, you're absolutely right that obviously political elites weaponize culture, but that's kind of the point, right? They're very successful at weaponizing culture because typically the left is kind of queasy around it. We kind of sort of don't really want to associate ourselves with it. And by the way, when I say the left, it's very hard to say that because the left is not homogenous. People have different ideas, right? But let's say the modern left and people my age, right? I mean, let's be honest. I speak to people my age and they say, are you patriotic? And they say, I don't give a fuck. Like, what has this country done for me? People are quite apathetic, right? However, you say that, but on the flip side, though, is when there's sort of an external force, such as immigration, quickly these apathetic people suddenly become quite tribalistic. So it's still very deep-rooted, even if they don't want to necessarily show the flag. But I think it's maybe a way of sort of batting off these sort of cultural fights, because, look, the left is always painted as anti-British. And again, it is a load of bullshit. Of course it is. But I do think there is sort of internal conversations and internal criticisms when people do want to engage with it. When people say maybe we should, maybe not necessarily completely reclaim the flag, but reclaim parts of it, because it's absolutely true that what the British flag represents is one of colonialism, slavery, and racism. But you could argue it's also one of collectivism. After World War II, when we fought fascism and so many people died, what was our response? Our response was no man left behind. We built the NHS, we built the welfare state, we built council houses, and for 10, 20 years, we had a very collectivist mindset. And you could even argue to go even further, maybe it's a bit cynical, whatever, and say, do you know what? It was Margaret Thatcher that destroyed this British value of collectivism with her neoliberal individualist policies. Let's get back to great British values of caring about people, whether you're black, brown, disabled, an immigrant, or a British national. I mean, I could see how that could work.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.